All right. It is Friday. It is Richard Schoenstein time. My litigator, well, I say my litigator, but you know what I mean. Good to see you. Although I actually did think if I was ever in that kind of situation, you'd probably be the first call. So
excellent.
Hopefully I don't find myself in that situation.
Try to stay out of trouble, will you?
I'm going to try and stay out of trouble. Speaking of trouble, let's talk about what we're seeing right here. So you and I were debating this, right? I was torn a little bit on the significance of Tony Satterfield, and then I tried to connect it back to the murders, because if we go back to the timing of this, it is significant. He is yet another person that is in the orbit of Alec Murdaugh who is questioning, where's the money? And so, you know, it supports, doesn't, in a way, the prosecution's theory that as a way to quiet all the noise, distract attention, divert attention, he did this?
I guess it does, and that's why the judge allowed it. My question about it would be this. Why did Tony Satterfield need to testify about these facts? He is a very sympathetic, very compelling witness, and it establishes what you're talking about, which is a timeline and a potential motive. But what it really establishes is that Alec Murdaugh was a garbage bag of a human being. I mean, for an attorney to do this, I haven't heard a story like this by an attorney taking advantage of a client, telling a client, I'm going to get you a couple $100,000 when he's looking at millions of dollars of recovery from an insurance company, and he's just going to pocket it. And it's not just a client. It's the children of a woman who worked at his home for 20 years, doing housekeeping, helping with the kids, part of the family. And for Alec Murdaugh to do that to the children of that woman, who are also his clients, it is disgusting on so many levels. So for me, the evidence that he is a terrible person is huge, and the connection to the motive theory is not that big.
But that's the problem. The jury can't consider him a terrible person. They can't consider this for propensity evidence, right? In other words, wow, Alec Murdaugh's a terrible person. You know, he must have murdered his family. It has to be connected in the right way. And the jury is given a limited instruction on how they're supposed to consider, but they're human beings, right?
The jury was given that limiting instruction. And in fact, they've been given that instruction several times. And will be given it again, I'm sure, before this trial is over. But Jesse, you're exactly right. I mean, how are they going to disregard the voluminous evidence in this case that this was just a horrible person? How are they going to disregard that when they decide his fate? I don't think it's humanly possible to disregard.
So I'm going to filibuster a little bit right now, so you can prepare to take out what you brought with us.
Nice.
This is me on camera filibustering, because I could talk about financial crimes, but what I'd rather talk about is it appears that Rich has now gone in the realm of Michael Bryant. He has now become the carrot top of legal analysis, because you have brought with you two things that are of importance. Please explain.
Okay. I think we have to say gray top. I don't think carrot top's going to work. All right. So here's your quiz. One's a tarp. Oops, I pointed. One's a tarp, one's a raincoat.
Right.
Can you guess? Can you tell the difference?
I would say that's the raincoat.
Yeah, and you would be right.
Yeah.
So they're both blue. But, you know, there's all this evidence that Murdaugh was walking around his mom's house carrying something sort of bunched up. And was it a tarp? And was it a raincoat?
Yep.
So I brought in these two, and they're pretty much the same. But this one folds out and is a raincoat, or really a poncho, which I think is more what that thing was.
And remember, the significance is, could Shelley Smith have gotten it wrong about what she saw? Right? And I mean, what is your take on it?
So I think if it's balled up and someone moves by quickly, maybe you don't know what it is, right? I didn't hear that it was folded neatly. These two happen to be slightly different in color, which I think is somewhat of a giveaway.
Yeah.
You know, the store I went to didn't have a lot of options.
Fair. Well,
but I think there could have been some confusion based on what it was. And what I still don't know about this is I'm not entirely sure where the prosecution is taking that story. I guess just to establish that Alec Murdaugh had in his hand maybe a raincoat.
So their opinion is it's the raincoat.
Yeah.
That's what he had bunched up, and there was GSR all over it. That's what their take is. And look, it's going to be fact sensitive. It's going to be for the jury to consider what exactly he had, what exactly was crumpled up, what exactly Shelley Smith saw. I'm glad you brought it in. Maybe keep them there. We'll talk more about it in a second. Now, the prosecution can put forward evidence of motive. They're not required to. When you hear this, I thought Mark Tinsley is one of the strongest witnesses for the financial aspect. What did you take away from his testimony?
Yeah, sure. It's a strong witness on the theory that the financial crimes were closing in on Murdaugh, that his years of stealing from people, and stealing from everybody, really, his family, his law firm, his clients, years of stealing that probably proliferated, right? Starts with borrowing a little money from an escrow account, and then the next thing you know, you're doing this insurance scam with the Satterfield kids. That was all about to implode on him. It's a strong witness for that. But two things about it. Number one, you still have to get from that to murdering your wife and son. Your financial crimes are about to implode on you. That is still a huge jump to, and therefore I am going to kill my wife and my son. That's number one. And two, by proving all of these financial crimes, I think the other thing the prosecution has inadvertently proven is that everybody in South Carolina had a reason to dislike Alec Murdaugh. And everybody in South Carolina, or at least a lot of people, could have had a grudge or a problem or an issue with him. In other words, maybe a lot of people had motive.
And you couple that with what we heard from the defense, where they've been trying to push forward this, or at least, bring up the idea of a two-shooter theory.
Right.
So then, it could be multiple people. So just talk about this also. You brought the rain jacket, the tarp. This is not pieces of evidence that are in the Alec Murdaugh.
No, I don't have it. I don't have any of the actual evidence.
But in your opinion, what is the strongest evidence for the prosecution right now? Is it you want to see where the raincoat goes? Is it the kennel video? Where do you stand on some of the most significant piece of evidence in the prosecution?
The two strongest bits of evidence for me, number one is the kennel video.
Yeah.
Because that is Alec Murdaugh being on the premises immediately before the murders and at a time where he said he wasn't there. So he's got a lot of problems with that video. One, he's there on the scene, real near when the murders happened, and two, he lied about it.
According to the prosecution's timeline.
Right. And timeline is the second best bit of evidence, because I saw the Law and Crime producers put together, you can see it on the website, a breakdown of the timeline taking into account the SUV evidence of when it was in park and when it was in drive, and the phone evidence of when I think the wife's phone was accessed, when it was flipped, when it was off. And that timeline looks pretty bad. First of all, it proves, I think, very clearly that he was only at his mother's for 20 minutes. And that's another lie, because he said it was 35 or 40 minutes, and he tried to pressure the caregiver for his mother to say it was 35 or 40 minutes. So that, again, is two problems. One is the timeline means he probably had time to be at the murders. And two is, again, he's lying about the evidence. And all of the lying is obviously a pretty bad look.
I will also add to that, I think the prosecution did a very strong job of establishing when the killings happened. Yes. I'm convinced at this point it happened at 8:50.
I agree with you. That's part of the timeline.
Right, yeah,
I think the timeline is strong.
And I think if you accept that, then as Rich said, you think about all these other pieces of evidence. So here, apparently she had prepared them dinner, but she had left. So it's, I thought she would somehow help or add some context to the timeline, right? In the sense that Alec Murdaugh said he had dinner. He never went down to the kennels. He took a nap, then went to visit his mother. She can't really add more to that part, right? But she did add to the fact that she made the dinner. What did you take away from her direct?
She doesn't resolve that point. I agree with Kathleen. The biggest takeaway for me was the notion that Alex had summoned both Maggie and Paul to come home. That's huge. If he called them there on the night that they were murdered, that's a fact I didn't know. But I want to raise this issue. Kathleen mentions Alec summoned the housekeeper home to tidy up. Why is there a housekeeper in a crime scene the morning after a double murder? This is absurd. Where was SLED? Where was law enforcement? She's walking around, she's picking up and washing khaki pants. Those pants might have been evidence. She's looking in the fridge. She had no business being there, and I don't know why that was allowed to happen. And if I was the defense, I'd be making a lot of, here we go again. They didn't secure the crime scene.
Yeah.
They didn't do a proper investigation. This was Alec Murdaugh, so they didn't even do this the right way. And that I found that particularly troubling.
I agree. I mean, there are parts of that where I think the defense makes really headway in terms of a failure to preserve the crime scene earlier on in the case. So I think that's really important. Let me see if I have a minute. I could bring in Rich Schoenstein, our litigator on the panel, to talk a little bit more about this. So Rich, I'm looking at this, we're waiting for the jury to start. I'm still blown away by that. I think that's some of the most significant testimony.
Oh, this is really an important witness, right? This is a percipient witness. This is a fact witness who was there and who has absolute credibility. No reason to believe she is lying about anything. She helps establish that Alec Murdaugh may have summoned both his wife and his son to the residence that evening. That's huge. The fact that he called them there prior to the murder. And then you're exactly right. You're right on point about all these things that are out of place. The pots from the dinner last night are oddly in the fridge with their lids on. There's a pair of khaki pants on the floor with a towel and some water that suggests someone used the shower. There are these pajamas and underwear belonging to Maggie that are also on the floor and a deadline out of place. That is a little bit odd too. So there are a lot of pieces here for something strange went on. And again, the thing we were talking about before the break, I'm blown away that she got in there and was wandering around in a crime scene the day after a double murder. I'm very bothered by that.
I don't blame you. So not only that, Rich, but what we also learned is apparently Maggie's wedding ring was in the SUV, a week before the killing? So now I'm thinking, well, there are problems in the marriage. She's thinking about the money. She's thinking about the marriage. This is not good for the defense.
That's where the prosecution is going. And the judge noted that the defense has been arguing throughout this trial that it was a happy family, a happy marriage, everything was peaches and cream. And now we find a wedding band in the back of the car under the seat. And that Maggie was stressed about financial issues. So as to the relevance of that comment, it's to establish that maybe this family wasn't as happy as the defense would have you believe.
The twists and turns in this case, I get like whiplash. I don't know which way to go with it. What do you think? I mean, you said it watching it. It is weird she was in the house.
It's very weird she was in the house when Sled is wandering around the property trying to survey a crime scene. I like her Harpootlian style here. He approaches these witnesses that he can't really, rake over the coals or attack. He approaches them very well. He's asking reasonable questions, and he's trying to mitigate a lot of damage that this witness did to his client.